Everybody hear me okay? I'm trying some new tricks today. So I'm in 2D mode. I don't have access to my headset right now. And my keyboard's right by my mic. Anyone hear my keyboard clicks? Or am I getting away with that? I'm gonna assume I'm getting away with that. So no one's giving me emojis. So I've got like some AI thing running through my video card to take out background noise. So I just want to make sure y'all can hear me okay. All right, we're going through the book of Matthew, and we are in episode 20, so book 20 of Matthew. And where we last left things, Jesus went down to the region of Judea. He was getting a lot of questions from people. He was answering a lot of questions. And kind of right at the end of chapter 19, Peter kind of says, let me actually pull it up real quick so that I make sure that I'm saying it right. Hang on. Peter says, look, we've left everything to follow you. What will there be for us? And then Jesus talks to him for a moment and he says, but many who are first will be last and the last first, right? So he basically says to Peter, hey, look, yeah, you have given up a lot. And I'm telling you that you 12, that you disciples of mine will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. He said, but many who are first will be last and the last first. So he seems to be starting the story. There's lots of times where someone will ask a question and Jesus will make a statement, and he can kind of see from the looks on people's faces, and also because he's Jesus, right? They didn't quite get what he just said. So then he tells them a story. He tells them a parable. So we're going to get into that right now. If y'all will follow me over to the build area, we will see Jesus clarifying what he said to Peter when he said, the first will be last and the last will be first. Over here, Matthew 20. I love this build, by the way. I walked through it earlier. It does just such an awesome job of illustrating these parables and these teachings. Thank you so much for build team for doing this awesome job. If you'd like to help us read, I'm going to go ahead and enable participation. You can go ahead and raise your hand, and we will call on you to help us read as we get into Matthew chapter 20. So you can use a raise hand emoji. I see Maria's first. Maria, if you will go ahead and help us read verses 1 through 4 here. We'll give everybody a chance to get over here. All right, Maria, are you there?
For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. And after agreeing with the workers for the standard wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Let me see. When it was about 9 o'clock in the morning, he went out again and saw others standing around in the marketplace without work. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and I will give you whatever is right.
All right, so we've got this scenario where this landowner says, hey, I need people to work in my vineyard. And he goes out really, really early in the morning and hires some people. And then he goes to the marketplace a little bit later in the morning. And then he keeps hiring people throughout the day. So let's see. Who else wants to help us read? Meta Mikey, you can help us. And if you will read, please, verses 5 to 8.
Okay, I'm not, it doesn't say the host has called on me. I just unmuted myself, so I think the settings are different here today. Oh, there we go. Megaphone, okay. 5 through 8. So they went, when he went out again about noon and 3 o'clock that afternoon, he did the same thing. And about 5 o'clock that afternoon, he went out and found others standing around and said to them, why are you standing here all day without work? They said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you go and work in the vineyard too. Let me keep going, or does that?
Yeah, go ahead and read verse 8.
It was evening. The owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the workers and give the pay, starting with the last hired until the first."
All right. So we have here at the beginning of the story, in verse 2, it says that this landowner agreed with the workers for the standard wage, right? So that kind of represents a full day's worth of pay. Your kind of 9 to 5, 8 hours worth of pay. But then the other workers, he just goes and hires them, and there's no mention of the pay for these other workers. But then we get here at the end in verse 8, and they say, okay, go ahead, start paying the workers. Pay the ones I hired last first, and the ones that I hired first last. So they all get in line. I love this visualization here. They all get in line, and they're getting their wages. But when those hired about 5 o'clock came, each received a full day's pay. When those hired first came, right? Remember, those hired about 5 o'clock. Those hired kind of right before the end of the day. Right? Maybe they worked like 30 minutes. Maybe they worked an hour. Right? We don't know how long exactly they worked. Right? So they're getting a full day's pay. That's a pretty sweet deal, right? It's a pretty sweet deal. But when those hired first came, they thought they would get more. But they also received just a day's worth of wages. So some of them worked, 10 times longer, but they got the same amount of pay in the end. When they received it, they started to complain against the landowner, saying, "These last fellows worked 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who bore the hardship and the burning heat of the day." The landowner replied, "Friend, I'm not treating you unfairly. Didn't you agree with me to work for the standard wage?" Here in verse 14, "Take what is yours and go. I want to give this to the last man the same as I gave to you. Am I not permitted to do what I want with what belongs to me, or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first and the first last." Right? So what does this mean? Well, actually, when I was a kid, I was at a church camp, and I remember sitting around the campfire with some of the other teens there at the camp. I was a teen also at the time, and one of them expressed this really, it was really raw. It was really honest, but this sort of frustration that they worked so hard, they felt, to do things God asked them to do. And even from a very young age, they made all of these big sacrifices for things that they wanted to do, that they knew that they shouldn't do. And they sort of had this struggle, and they were really struggling with the idea that someone who accepts Christ very late in life, like, maybe on their deathbed or something like that, would be given the same benefit, the same treatment, that they would also be saved. And I remember thinking that at the time, I thought of this story, and I remember thinking, like, why would you be upset that someone would be saved? Why would you be upset that they're going to have the same thing that you would have? Then I thought about it, and the way that we think as people, right? Like, some of these folks worked 10 times longer, right, than everybody else, and they're going to get paid the same, and there's that jealousy, right, can kind of eat away at us. But what Jesus is saying here in this story, right, when he reiterates again, same as he did at the end of chapter 19, so the last will be first and the first last, is he's speaking against this idea of feeling superior to one another, regardless of the logic that we are using to try to say or imply that we are superior to someone else. In this example, he's talking about, okay, you labored longer, but that doesn't make you better. Like, you're all my children, right? You labored longer, but you knew the deal, right? Like up here in verse 2, you labored longer, but you knew the deal, and you chose this labor because you love me, and I love you, and you want to be like me, right? You knew the deal. That doesn't make you better than anyone else. And so Jesus, I think, I read some interesting commentary on this passage, and the person writing the commentary was of the mind that Jesus told this entire parable as a really subtle rebuke to Peter. Because remember, at the end of chapter 19, Peter kind of gets up and says, I gave up everything for you, in a way that was almost braggartly, right? And so Jesus says, oh, I mean, you will have there is a reward for that, for you 12, because of the way that you have labored with me. And the subtext there that we're going to get into, right? The persecution that you will face for these things, there's a reward there. But also remember, the first will be last and the last will be first, right? When we look at this verse, which he says several times, the first will be last and the last will be first, what he's saying is this hierarchy that you have created is going to be turned over on its head. Like, the value system by which you view the world is not the value system that God uses when he views the world, right? And so this commentary said that Jesus is implying there will be surprises in heaven for people, and it might be on both sides, right? People who think that they are not worthy or that they are not of value, when they are in heaven will find out that they are worthy and they are valued, right? And so there might be some people walking around, we talk a lot about arrogant religion and arrogant religious leaders. There might be some people who think that they have a special place reserved for them in heaven, that, okay, well, yeah, the 12 are going to be sitting in their thrones, but I'm going to be in the 13th one, and it might be a little bit smaller, but I'm going to be right up there with them because of the way I live my life, right? And Jesus is saying, no, you might be surprised, right? That's what he's saying. There will be surprises in heaven because God judges us differently. But in that discussion about how God judges us differently, the important thing to remember that Jesus is calling out here is everybody gets the same pay, right? Everybody gets the same pay. So it's important to remember that we are not, that God does not view any of us as inherently more valuable than anyone else, but that he loves all of us in a way that is equal and fair in his eyes, whether it seems fair to us or not. I think that's a neat story. So we're going to continue over. Oh, I almost went the wrong way. Let me go over here. And there's 3 distinct parts to Matthew chapter 20. We're going to get into the second part now. I call on others to help me read again. Wandering, if you will help us here. Oh, never mind. I accidentally called on Chad. Hello. So we'll have Chad first and then Wandering later. Chad, if you will help us read verses 17 to 19, please. Are you there, Chad? Hello. Can't hear you if you are. All right.
It shows you muted, Chad. Hello. To unmute, press unmute.
He sent me a message and said it says that he's muted, but I don't see the option to unmute him, so I don't know. Let me try to turn it off and on again. Maybe that'll work. Hang on.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, there we go.
Read what?
17 to 19.
Right. As Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took 12 aside privately and said to them on the way, "Look, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priest and the expert in the law. They will condemn him to death and will turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged severely and crucified, yet on the third day he will be raised."
All right, thank you. So I think this is interesting because we see a few times where Jesus prophesies and tells the disciples what's going to happen to him, and it's so clearly obvious that they don't get it. Like, it just doesn't make sense to them. I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. But it just seems so clear they don't get it, because Jesus says, okay, look, everyone, I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be handed over to the priests. They're going to condemn me. and I'm going to die. I'm going to die soon. And then they just don't acknowledge that, right? Then just all of a sudden, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, so that's James and John. James and John were both Jesus' disciples. They were brothers. And their father's name was Zebedee. And so their mother comes to Jesus, and he says to her, "What do you want?" And she replies, "Permit these sons of mine to sit one at your right and one at your left in your kingdom," right? Because Jesus just said, okay, there's going to be, at the end of Matthew chapter 19, it said there's going to be 12 thrones. Y'all are going to be sitting in these thrones and judge the houses of Israel. And so she totally ignores Jesus talking about being crucified, and just says, "Hey, let these two sons of mine sit one at your right hand and one at your left." And Jesus says, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you about to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" Again, hinting like, are you about to go through this suffering that I'm about to suffer? Like he's talking to James and John now, right? And they said to him, "We are able." And I really loved the note in my Bible on this verse. It says essentially the most naive words spoken in Scripture, because they are just not getting it. They are not understanding what Jesus is about to go through. But both of them say, James and John say, we are able to drink from the cup that you are about to drink. And Jesus says, you will drink my cup. Like, you will go through the suffering that I will go through. And we'll see that much later in Scripture, after the Gospels, like in Book of Acts. You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right and my left is not mine to give. Rather, it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. And so we're going to see again, the disciples are going to get jealous. They're going to start getting jealous. I believe.
Oh, we actually go up over this little green path.
I knew that too. I went too far down. I knew we had to turn. Oh, now I'm stuck in the build.
Ruh-roh.
Uh-oh.
Can you turn on your flight and come out?
I don't think maybe.
You can always re-enter.
Flight is not available here for me, it says. Yeah, I might have to re-enter. I'm so sorry, guys. I'll catch right back up with you.
Yeah, don't follow him. Come this way. If you're on that side of the hill, come into the clouds, and then there's a little path here that's green. Go ahead and follow this way, so you don't get trapped under the clouds. Here we go. Are you making your way, Meta Mikey? Yep. Fantastic. You made it. The treacherous path, but you made it. Sue. Yep, just make sure you hug the wall. There is a little place you can fall in if you don't. Awesome.
All right. Hey, made it. Sorry, everybody. I knew the right way to go, Alina. I knew it was down that side. I just went down the path instead of through the thing there. All right. So we've got the disciples. They're getting a little jealous now because Jesus just told James and John that he'll get to drink from the cup, right? They're still not getting it. They're not understanding that the cup is persecution, is torture, is pain, right? So when the other 10 heard this, they were angry with their brothers. Let me open up Host Tools again. Wandering. Let me go ahead and read for us to verse 25 there to verse 28.
Okay. But Jesus called them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions use their authority over them. It must not be this way among you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
All right. Thank you, Wandering. So Jesus is like, guys, you're still not getting this. You're still not getting it, right? He says, look, this is what the Gentiles do. This is, in this context, when Jesus is talking about Gentiles, he's saying, this is what those who don't follow God, this is what they do, right? They go and they parade about who gets to be the boss, right? Like, how many of you, I'm gonna say it's probably safe to assume most of us are gamers here, right? Anybody ever been in like a clan or a guild or something like that, where all this drama broke out about who got to be guild leader or assistant guild leader or anything like that? I'm sure that can't just have been me who has been in those sorts of online gaming communities, right? That's essentially what the disciples are doing here. They're kind of fighting, like, oh, I thought I was the special one. I thought I was the most important. Why do you get to drink from the cup? I want to drink from the cup, right? Because they're not understanding, like, Jesus is trying to be so clear with them about what this cup means, and they're not getting it. And so Jesus says, look, forget all of that. Like, he's ignoring at this point that they don't understand what the cup means, right? Forget all of that. He says, this is something that worldly people do where they argue about who gets to be the boss. They use authority over others. It must not be this way among you. Instead, whoever wants to be great must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. He's hinting again, you're not getting it. I am here to die for you, right? The example that I am about to set for you, is Jesus, the example that I'm about to set for you is that you lay your life down for one another, not that you try to lord over one another, that you try to be the boss, to be the special one, to be in charge. Like, you're all fighting for the wrong thing, right? We're called to be servants to one another. We're not called to lead one another. I told this story earlier in Rusty Church, but there's been many churches that I've been in where, and actually one almost comical event happened where someone came in, walked right up to the pastor of the church, and said, "God told me that I'm supposed to be the pastor of this church, and I'm here to start speaking and helping to lead the flock here." Like, walked up to the existing pastor and said that, right? And the pastor was like, "Well, that job is currently filled, but we've got lots of other places here where you could volunteer. We need help with the children's ministry. We need help, taking the garbage out after service, like those sorts of things." And this person was not interested in that, right? They wanted to come in and they immediately wanted to be the one that was in charge, who was teaching and was calling the shots. And, they weren't willing to pick up a broom, right? They weren't willing to be the servant to the others in the church. They just wanted to lead. And that's a sign that's a clear sign of arrogant religion, y'all, when they're not willing to serve, to get their hands dirty and to really, to care for the orphan and the widow, right? Because that Jesus is reiterating so many times, right? We've already talked about we will talk about when the least of these, what you've done for the least of these, you've done unto me. We're getting there in a couple of weeks. But that's still a clear thread all through Matthew, with Jesus telling us that we're called to take care of those less than I don't want to say less than us, those who don't have that same privilege that we have, right? Anyone who we can take care of, we're called to take care of. That's our calling, to the point that we might lay our lives down one for another, right? All right, and then we've got one last section here, and if someone can help me read, we'll do these 3 verses here in the corner of this path. Looks like we've got Pammy Sue. Can you help us read 29 to 31?
Yeah. As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed them. 2 blind men were sitting by the road. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, "Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David." The crowd scolded them to get them to be quiet, but they shouted even more loudly, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David."
This is another one of those stories that, if you've been with us through our study of Matthew, and if you haven't been with us, if you go back and read the book of Matthew up into this point, this happens a lot. This exact scenario where someone comes to Jesus and the disciples and says, "Jesus, help me. Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David, help me, help me, help me." And the crowd or even the disciples will say, "You know what? Go away. You're bothering Jesus. He's too important for this thing right now." And I think there's a reason that this echoes. And so I want to call it out very specifically here. And I want you all to think, not just right now and today, but of where you see this, even kind of in your daily lives or with other people, especially within the church. Not to call out any specific churches, but how many times have you seen someone calling out in the church that they need help of some sort? And the church kind of says, hey, be quiet. You're distracting everybody. right? I know that when I was growing up, that I saw instances of this, and I was on the side of, unless people know that they need to be quiet in church and not make such a fuss, man, they're being so dramatic, right? As very literal examples, but this happens often enough in scripture that I really think this is a really clear thing that Jesus wants us to understand, right? So they're calling for Jesus's help, but he's and the church tells them to be quiet. The crowd scolds them to be quiet, but they shout even louder, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." And I think that this speaks to both the reluctance sometimes of the religious, even if they are well-intentioned, to help the people that need it. But I love even more the implication that is to come with verse 31, when they says they shouted even more loudly, right? In the face of that persecution, in the face of being told by the religious people, right, to be quiet, that they got louder. And I think that something awesome here happens. Jesus stopped, called them, and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" Right? I think that's awesome. That when someone speaks up and they call out to Jesus for help, and the world tries to drown them out and they cry out even harder, Jesus's response to that is, "What do you want me to do for you?" Right? What is it that you would like? And they said, "Lord, let our eyes be opened." These two blind men, right? This is not a simple request, right? And they know that it's not a simple request. They've been blind their whole life. If it was a simple request, they could have asked anyone, but it's not. And then moved with compassion. Why was Jesus moved with compassion? I think it's because of their faith here. We see their faith going against the crowd and crying out in humility, right, to Jesus for help. Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes. Immediately, they received their sight and followed him. I would love, I would have loved to see the looks on some of those folks' faces, the crowd shouting at these guys, "Hey, be quiet. You're disturbing everybody. You're getting in the way, yada yada." And then, a couple minutes later, the person that you were yelling at to shut up, they're right beside you, and their sight's been restored. And they're just kind of looking at you and smiling. That feeling that they must have had in the pit of their stomach. Oh man, I just think there's just something so cool about that. But I think there's something to glean here in this last section of Matthew chapter 20, which is that perseverance, that not giving up, especially when the people that are telling you to give up are the religious elite, right? But that with Jesus, all things are possible, right? And you're crying out and you're following him. I just think there's something really cool there. So that's the end of Matthew chapter 20. I'm going to go ahead and close this out in prayer. God, we thank you so much for this time together as your children. And God, I ask that as we go through our lives this week and past this week, God, that you would bring to our remembrance that the value system in heaven is not the same as the value system here on earth, God, that you would use that knowledge in us to help us keep away from being prideful or arrogant about ourselves or our journey, God, and that you would help us be loving and compassionate towards others, God, that you would help us have the attitude that Jesus described to the disciples of being a servant for one another, God, of being a slave for one another, of being willing to lay our lives down one for another, that example that you laid out for us, that you laid out for us in your crucifixion, but also that you hinted to here in Matthew chapter 20, God, that would be the example that we would cling to serve and love one another. And God, I ask that in those times in our lives where we need something from you, that you would give us that strength to persevere, God, past the naysayers, God, and pursue and chase after you. That even when it's not just the world, God, that is telling us that we can't have what we need from you, that we know that we need from you. Even when it's the church, God, we ask that you would continue to give us that perseverance in the face of the naysayers and the arrogant religion. God, I thank you so much for everything that you have done in and through VR and MMO Church, and everything that you're going to continue to do in and through us. In Jesus' name, Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So good to be here. Pastor Lena, do we have any end of service announcements, or we just want to make sure I didn't miss
You know, I keep forgetting to let everybody know that after service, if you have the app, Walkabout app, there's a group that gathers just a few minutes after 8 p.m. Eastern here in the Walkabout mini golf.